Hello, and thank you for joining us in this very special interview where I have the pleasure and the privilege of talking to Sir John Jones about his new book, Dusting Off Thunderbolts, published by John Catt and available now. And it's my absolute joy, because I'm a complete superfan, to welcome Sir John Jones. And a good evening, sir.
Good evening, Emma. Good to see you.
And you. Now, I obviously have followed your work, know everything there is to know potentially about your career and your books, but people who might just be having the treat of meeting you for the first time or discovering you in your work for the first time, what's been your career to date, and how have you ended up at this point writing these wonderful books?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was born in Liverpool, down by the docks, actually, in a place called Everton, which is right in the middle of Liverpool. And I went to school there, and then I think it was about 1974. I took a vow of poverty and became a teacher, and then I taught modern languages. Actually, I mean, I also taught some PE and bits and pieces of drama and things like that. But I was a modern languages teacher. I had a degree in French and Latin, so I was a teacher for a number of years. And in fact, I tell people, they come to me and say, how did you become a head relatively young, in your 30s? And I said, well, I was a main scale teacher for 5 years. It never crossed my mind to apply and be ambitious, and I just enjoyed the role. And then I became an assistant head of year, and they gave me a couple of £100 to do it, and that suddenly, and then I became a deputy head, and then a head teacher, and I was a head teacher of 3 schools. The first 2 particularly were in very tough areas. They were very challenging schools. The third one was what I suppose you could call a cruising school. It was a comfortable school, big sixth form. And I felt, I'd never had a school that had a big sixth form, and I thought I need that experience. I'd always taught in 11 to 16. So I went there, and that was a great journey, because it was actually, I always said it was tougher to get a school that was comfortable to consider itself capable of great things. It was tougher to do that than a school that was, well, it was in the National League tables, it was joint bottom with Tower Hamlets. It was bottom of Knowsley, and Knowsley was joint bottom in the National League table with Tower Hamlets. And that school, actually, to turn around, with a great group of staff, that culture was an easier job. Because people kind of understood that we have to change, we have to progress, we have to do things differently, for the sake of these kids and their life chances. So I was head of 3 schools, and then I kind of drifted into doing conferencing, the phone going, will you come and help this school with that? And then the government asked me to go on secondment, and I was one of these people who was parachuted into challenging schools in various parts of the country. In parallel to that, I was doing the conference circuit. So the conference circuit kind of gobbled up all the work I was doing in schools, but that really gave me some amazing stories to tell and some great experiences to build on the experiences I had. And so now I'm here, and I do all sorts of weird and wonderful things. I've started writing. I'm the chair of the Everton in the Community charity at Everton Football Club. I'm a chair of governors at the Everton Free School and Football College, which is an alternative provision school. I've just got an honorary PhD from Bournemouth University, which was great. My pal had to work about 3 or 4 years to get hers. And they just said, would you like one? And I said, I'd very much like one. So that was lovely. So those sorts of things have been happening to me just to keep me engaged, because I'm 72 now. And I should be really hitting golf balls most of the time. But I just love being in schools, and I love education. And I just think it is the key to the kingdom, really. And if you can change the world, if you can effectively educate a young person, I do believe it is that important. So here I am, still talking about it, writing about it, and going off to win. I mean, it's taken me all over the world, so I'm really lucky. We've got a map in the study there, and it's dots all over the place, and most of it has been work in education. But interestingly, I've spun off now into the National Dairy Leaders Conference. I've just done a big conference for international entrepreneurs, and you know, like I did some work for O2, you know, their senior leadership team, Canon UK. So I've been kind of getting drawn into a more eclectic kind of leadership. And one of the things about that experience is it taught me that there are key principles to being a leader that apply anywhere. So the reason why I wanted to write the book, Dusting Off Thunderbolts, and I didn't want it just to be an education book. And I know I had a chat with the publisher because they specialize in education. You've had books published, great books published with them yourself. But I said I want it to be eclectic in the sense that it will interest lots of people, because much of the communication I get back after a conference, a lot of it's from parents. And they said, you know, I stopped listening as a teacher and started listening as a mum or a dad, because this applies when I get home. Or you'll have governors in the audience who have nothing to do with education directly, but they run a company and they'll ask you to go and work with their leadership team. So I suddenly realized that a key messages for leaders, whatever kind of leadership role you're in, that I could put together in the shape of a book. And then as I was writing the book, I suddenly realized that, you know, everybody's a leader. As soon as you have a conversation, you're leading. And so every conversation should be precious. Every time you interact with a young person on a school corridor, it's a leadership moment, both for you and the child. And as soon as somebody says to you, do you know what, I agree with you, whatever it is you say, it could be about football. If they say, do you know what, I really do agree with you, you've got a follower. And if you have a follower, you're a leader. And people start to listen. So that's what brought me to the point where I thought, I'm going to write a book about leadership and see if I can tell some stories that cover these principles that I hold dear.
That's really fascinating, because your first book, obviously Magic Reading Business, was very much rooted in education. And I jumped into this one, into Dusting Off Thunderbolts, thinking it was, I won't say just an educational leadership book, but that its focus was on educational leadership. And it very obviously isn't just for education as soon as you kind of jump into it, because it draws from so many different reference points. Now, having worked in education for a long time myself, I began to almost stand up, look out, and start to think about all of these different beautiful reference points that you pull in. But what was the thinking behind drawing from? I mean, they really are broad. We're not just saying it's business, education, or, you know, healthcare. The references that you have in there are from, well, I'll let you explain them, but are so broad. Why did you cast the net so wide with your reference points for leadership?
Well, I suppose if you're bold enough to say that everybody is a leader and that every moment you interact with another person is a moment for leadership, then you start to, your antennae goes out there, and you start, I'll sit on a train and I'll listen to a conversation between two strangers across the aisle. And I find it fascinating. And what I always describe my role as a translator of theory. You know, there's lots of gobbledygook written about leadership, and then you know, a lot of, you know, highly intellectualized thinking, which is great thinking, and we all need to dip into that well. But I think sometimes you need to have someone translate it, and the best way to translate any theory is to tell a story. And people go, oh yeah, is that what it means? And stories are great. So I'm a collector of stories. And what happens is you get so many good stories that the themes start to interconnect. And it's almost like your cup fills up and then the book spills over the top, because you've got to put it in a book. Because I've got another cup that's filling with all sorts of stories. And that's more about a systems book, you know, about a more global thing about the world and the way things are moving globally and some of the concerns we have and some of the challenges we face. You know, you know, the kind of the Harari books, or the Malcolm Gladwell kind of. There's one of those books in me somewhere. But this is a bridge between the magic weaving business, which is blatantly educational, and it's meant for the adults in schools who weave magic with children on a day-to-day basis, through to this, which is a bridge across into, you know, more kind of global thinking. So that's why I ended up with it, really, and why the stories are so wide.
I was reading it, and I was fascinated by your visitations from the muses. I have never read any leadership. I mean, this bookcase behind me is full of leadership books. Not one of them talks about muses. And it was such a kind of seductive aspect to the narrative in the book. And I just want you to explain, and I will not do justice if I try to paraphrase it. So I should let you explain what we mean by the idea of the muses, and also how to facilitate their visits. How do you get them to come along?
Right. Well, what was that quote I use in the book? Isabel Allende said, show up, show up, show up. And one day the muse will show up too. You know, there's this a relentlessness about living. And you almost become fertile ground. You become attractive to muses. Now, I'm a classicist. You know, my degree, I said before, was in French and Latin. And so, you know, I did ancient history as a specialist subject. And so the ancients fascinated me, and I know they do you. And their philosophy, you know, was all about this idea that the genius, the muses, or the goblins, or whatever you think of them, they're out there in the ceiling, in the sky, they're all over the place, and they're waiting for fertile ground. And we're all fertile ground. It isn't the Winston Churchills that they visit. You know, it isn't those kind of stereotypically great leaders that we talk about. I think the stereotype in people's heads has damaged the confidence of people sufficiently, you know, enough for instance, in schools, as you know, you're very much, you know, passionate about professional development, and people don't apply for jobs because they think they're not good enough, because they have this idea, this stereotypical concept of leadership where you have to be good enough. And that really kind of worries me. That actually, who do I write about in the book? It's this notion, you don't seek greatness, because that's where the stereotype does its damage, that you have to be great to be a leader. All you need to do is every day be a bit better than you were yesterday. So don't seek greatness, just be better. And you can't make great decisions. You can only make the best decision. And some of those will be the worst decisions you've ever made. But only history, Kierkegaard says, the trouble with life is you live it forwards, but you only understand it backwards. So there's a kind of a message of deep humility in the book that is about this power lies in all of us. It isn't just in the special few. And the ancients had it right. You know, so when Homer starts one of his great works, he calls upon the muse. The first couple of lines are always a prayer to the muse. Please visit me when I'm working on this, because without you, I can't do it. Now, I'm not saying that the muse is a kind of spirit or a goblin in the roof rafters, or some weird and wonderful entity, because I mean, I use lots of examples. Ruth Stone, that has that lovely example. She was a poet but worked on a farm in Virginia, and she could hear a line from a poem that she'd been kind of throwing around in her mind coming across the field towards her, and she would drop what she was doing and run back to the house to get a pen and a piece of paper, and she could feel it coming behind her. And sometimes when she got there, it was too late. It had gone. And you know, you'll have experienced this, Emmy, you know, an idea that you wake up in the middle of the night and you'll think, oh my goodness me, that's a great idea. And you don't write it down. And the following day, it's gone. And I just became fascinated by this notion that we all possess this wonderful spirit within us that can connect with all those muses out there. And that can be anything. It could be a poem, a painting, your granddad, you know, anybody. Something will happen, a view that you come across, and it will touch something deep inside of you and bring out that spirit. And the poet Lorca called it the duende. He actually gave it a name, that we all have this duende within us. Sadly, many people haven't the confidence or don't believe sufficiently in themselves, or just don't show up, as Isabel Allende said. And so they die with the music in them. And the music is in all of us. We're waiting for that muse. I mean, Stephen King, you know, the writer, his muse is called Scruffy. This little, I kind of think of Scruffy as like a little dog, but it's kind of an alien that lives in the thicket opposite his kitchen window where he writes. And he says for weeks he doesn't get visited by Scruffy. And then one day Scruffy is nibbling at his ankles and the words pour out of his fingers. And he said, don't ask me why. And that's the muse, isn't it? Noel Gallagher sits at night with his guitar noodling. And he said, and I'm waiting for a tune to drop from the sky. And if I'm not ready for it, then Chris Martin will steal it. So the more I read about great people, the more they all seem to have these muses. And this notion that if you work hard and you practice and you dedicate and you're alert and you're ready, you'll fail and fail and fail and fail. But one day, some idea or something you do will be so amazing that you'll have what I call in the book an ole moment. And I mean, I encourage teachers, you know what, you know what it's like in a classroom. There's this little kid who hasn't done anything spectacular for a while, and then suddenly produces this great, they'll say something or a little poem, or they'll have an idea, and you'll be astonished. And you know, the sad thing about a lot of us, particularly teachers, is we'll say to the child, who gave you that idea? Or who told you that? Or where did that come from? As if it wasn't them. And it was them. And something sparked something in them, and out it came. That muse is what I'm talking about. So I don't know what a muse is, but you have your own. You'd be able to list yours now. You'll have, people call them happy places. A happy place is a muse. Or certainly muses hang around happy places. You know.
And it's such an interesting point about just showing up and doing the best you can until great things happen. And I think that's such an important message for leaders to hear, that you don't have to go into leadership as the finished product. You can go in and try your best, and don't mean just sit there and go, are you here yet? Are you here yet? Where's my muse? But actually in the process of striving is putting oil on the wheels of the muse to arrive, to then help kind of steer you along to the next great thing.
Yeah.
But my question is, how do we make the space in leadership to be able to be receptive to that kind of thinking, to the kind of the step back, look up? How do we avoid the kind of siren call of the operational and the procedural? How do we make that space to be able to do that? If we're waiting for inspiration to strike, or the muse to visit, or however you want to phrase it, how do we make the space for them to come?
Yeah, I mean, there are two answers to that, really. One, they can happen by accident. So have the awareness. I mean, for instance, if you're too busy as a leader, you won't notice them. You know, I mean, I used to go on what I called a NAT walk. NAT was notice, appreciate, thank. So you just walk around and you just put your noticing hat on. And it's the art of noticing. So you just walk around, and you have to, you have to deliberately plan that, because if you think it's going to happen, when you've got a spare moment, it isn't going to happen. You'll find some busy stuff to fill that space. So you have to decide, that's my walkabout time, and I'm noticing. And not only am I noticing, but I will make a note of what I notice so that tomorrow I can do an appreciation session, which is write a little note or just find a person and say something. That display in your room, wow, it's amazing. You know, can I send people in? It's dead simple stuff. And then the thank you comes a couple of days after that. So you have to plan those moments. So as a busy head teacher, you know, I used to think that if I'm out at a meeting for 2 hours in the morning, the first thing I have to do when I come back is just walk around the school and put your head into every classroom. Now, as a secondary head, that's a bit of a challenge. So, you know, maybe it'll be, well, in that faculty, you know, I'll go and see all the science teachers. And it's amazing, actually, when you do that, how people don't know you've been out. But if you don't do it, what they're saying at break time is, he's never here. You know? So what I mean is, plan those moments. So that's one thing, the nat walk. So you're not just walking around aimlessly, it's to notice and then appreciate and then thank. And the other thing is to read. Every single day, you should put aside some time to read. And it doesn't have to be an education book. You know, I love historical novels. I'm in the middle of a trilogy on the Wars of the Roses. And it's fascinating. It's they're novels, but it's all based on historical fact. And they inspire me. And they're always, every time I mean, one other strategy I would suggest is get a dog, because I actually now combine the dog walk with reading, because all my reading, not all, most of it is on Audible. So I'll take books out for a walk with me. I've just finished Billy Connolly's book, Windswept and Interesting, and Billy reads it. And my goodness me, walking up our canal here with the dog at night, you know, when it's dark, and it's just me and Billy Connolly. And when he's telling you a funny story, he starts laughing because he finds it funny. And so you find yourself just laughing. But what I mean is read, build in time for reading. It's absolutely fundamental. And the other thing, I think I tell a story in the book about the guy who built in reflection time, you know, at the end of every day.
Oh, the teacher with his feet on the desk. The fellow, yeah.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, because obviously my stereotypical thought was everybody else is busy and look at this lazy so-and-so with his feet up having a cup of tea, you know. But he was doing the most important thing. He was just thinking about the day. And he said, what were the three things he said to me? He said, what I think about is, what have I done today that I never want to repeat? And what have I done today that I'm proud of? Or what's happened today that needs telling? You know, what a child's done something really great or funny or whatever. And then how am I going to share it? And he spent 15 minutes with a brew, just doing that and writing it down. Absolutely vital. Now, the muses are waiting for people who give their time to those processes. Now, there are many more, and I cover them in the book, don't I?
Yeah.
You know, the way to make yourself a fertile ground for the muse. And you know, have role models. Who are your role models? You know, what would they do in this situation? I mean, Bob Chapman is a hero of mine, the guy I talk about who ran the company in the United States, who almost, you know, could have gone into liquidation.
I love that story.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yes.
It's amazing. So have those role models. And so I'll find myself saying, even now, what would Bob do here? What would Bob do in this situation? It's not, as I think, you know, we've talked before about this, it's not a list of 22 things to do to make you a good leader.
No.
You know, it's not about that. It's about a way of being that builds. I don't know, what's that? You read Atomic Habits?
Yes.
It's a great book. But the key principle there is that although you start off deliberately planning them and trying them, that once they become they start off as first nature, but when they become second nature, they become part of your way of being, and you don't even have to think about them. They just, you just know in that situation, you'll smile because you never used to, but you thought, wouldn't smiling be a good idea? And you practice it, and it's first nature, and it's awkward, and it's clumsy, and it's the plonking of the learner playing the piano. But eventually, if you stay with it and you show up and you show up, it becomes second nature, and it becomes part of you. You know?
I just find that the whole thing fascinating about the space to think, because a lot of the work that I do is around how we learn. And so much of the processing, the things that we do in the day, happens on a subconscious level. We're constantly processing things that have happened to us, and we're not equipped to consciously deal with everything that's happening on a conscious level. So when I was reading about the muses, I was thinking this fits exactly with what we know about time for them, those things that we were processing on a kind of a subconscious level, to go, oh, hello, how about us? How about these things that we did? So all the visitation by the muses and all of the space to think, space to reflect, space for the good ideas to come forward, fits as well with what we know about how the brain works and how we process information. So I was kind of reading it through that lens, which was absolutely fascinating for me. Now, you say you don't want to codify anything. It's not the kind of 7 steps or 21 steps, to be a great leader. But I just wanted to, there's a bit on page 154, right near the end. I did read the whole thing, John. Which is about, well, I'm not giving you a quote from page 4. I got right to the end.
The 6 questions. Yeah.
The 6 questions, and they are like an absolute blueprint for me for that clarity in leadership thinking. We can go round the houses with how you should do things and what you should do, and you just give these 6 steps, and they are so clear. And for a leader who's potentially in that lonely job of leadership, just a kind of an overview of how they can leverage those 6 questions to really start to affect change in the way that they attack a problem or begin to approach an area for development. Yeah, I think they're absolutely wonderful. Have you used
really, they are. It's a bit, you remember Basil Fawlty and Fawlty Towers?
I do.
Especially the subject, the bleeding obvious. Yeah. I mean, I've read these questions in so many ways, and people seem to put them in ways that you can't quite understand. That I thought, well, this is how I phrase them for myself. Yeah. And it was important, I think, that each question was attached to a key aspect of leadership. So the first one, why am I putting myself through this? Why am I doing this to myself? And people say, you must know your why. And yeah, okay. But to actually say, but just ask yourself the question, why am I doing this to myself? Why have I put myself in this situation? And that's vision, isn't it? Yeah. And then the second one then is also, and this is the crucial step, how will I feel when I've sorted this out? When I don't have this problem anymore. And people often miss that stage completely. They stumble into action. Now, action is the 6th question for me. So the key is to get yourself into. I remember when the England rugby team they lost the World Cup final in England. I can't remember which decade it was in. It was when Will Carling was the captain, and he said they'd practiced, they'd rehearsed and visualized getting to the final, and they got to the final and they played Australia. He said, but we hadn't rehearsed winning it. And the Woodward team, I think it was, rehearsed the medal ceremony. Wow. Felt the medal and put it between their teeth. And it had to be gold. Nothing else would be enough. So they got themselves psychologically and emotionally into the frame of mind of the winner. And nothing else, therefore, was acceptable. And the crucial, when you said, why am I doing this to myself? the next question, what will I feel like when I've done it? When I've got through this and we've sorted it out, is a fundamentally important question. And then, of course, the other four do you want to go through them quickly? Or are we...
Yeah, well, you've got the kind of the way I really liked the way you'd written them was because they were written from a feeling point of view. They weren't written from a this is what you do next, and after that you do this, and after it was really asking yourself those kind of searching questions about, why am I doing this to myself? How can I overcome the feeling of failing? It was very much in that lonely job when you're by yourself potentially as a leader. You have to kind of look inside yourself and have the answers to that before you can do anything else. And I absolutely just love the way you phrased it through that personal, emotional response part, rather than let's get a spreadsheet out and then let's look at some data.
Put it on the whiteboard, and which are not unimportant,
No?
But actually, that's why in the title, it's Dusting Off Thunderbolts, the quest for the heart of leadership. Because what this is about leadership of the heart. And that's why you can't just put a set of cognitive questions that all leaders must ask themselves. It's got to be in the realm of feeling. It's got to be affective. And unless you're feeling it, that really you're not going to get in touch with what Lorca calls the duende, or that spirit within you, for the muse to tap into that spirit. That's why you've got to kind of, now I know some leaders are frightened of that level. And I think I tell the story about the head teacher who chastised the deputy, or chastised the teacher for crying at a parents' evening with the parents. And that's a true story. She told me that after a conference. And she felt guilty, and she wanted to know if she'd done the right thing. My goodness me, now you'd have to read the book and the story to really understand what we're talking about. But there are some leaders, and sadly, much of the training I experience doesn't get into the world of emotion, or it seems to be frightened of it. For instance, I mean, we don't say, I did a lot of work on happiness with Alistair Smith some years ago. And we did that book, The Secrets of Happy Schools. People won't use the word happy. They use the word well-being, which suddenly makes it conceptual. And it's an idea. No, it's not an idea. It's about an emotion. And so I unashamedly now use words when I'm speaking in conferences like tenderness, warmth. And people kind of go, whoa, isn't that dangerous country to get into? It's the only country to get into. And so unashamedly, this is about finding what I call the heart of leadership. Whether I find it or not, well, the reader will know at the end. But if you don't, I do say in the introduction, it'll make you cry. Because it made me cry when I was writing some of the stories. And they just touch me so much. And if you don't feel comfortable with that, then it doesn't mean you don't read it. I just want you to then ask yourself the question, why am I feeling uncomfortable in the realm of emotion? Because all the great leaders I've ever worked with and experienced, they get emotion and they harness it. And in fact, the emotion muse, the muse of emotion, is with them on a day-to-day basis.
I'm guessing that it's because ultimately leadership is a human endeavor, and the thing that makes humans human is all of that, all of the feelings, all of the humanity, the humility, the understanding, the empathy. All of those things make us human. And if leadership is a human endeavor and we fail to emphasize and fail to, engage with that, if we just focus on the codification of leadership activity rather than on championing the human endeavor of leadership, then what are we doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, you know, I mean, the four pillars in the book are the four muses, and each one of those muses is kind of interconnected, but they're all rooted in the duende, in the emotion. They're all deeply human. You know, ikigai is a life well lived. You know, and ohana is this notion of family, you know, deep family connection. And sisu is that relentless spirit that refuses to give in. And then, you know, ubuntu is just to be deeply human and to be deeply vulnerable and to embrace all your failings and yet to prevail. You know, the more I read about the great leaders I read about, all those qualities just keep coming to the fore. So I just try to capture them all in the book. And the reason why I called it Dusting Off Thunderbolts is because if you accept that kind of deep humility, deeply human, that kind of realm of leadership, then you accept that you can't do this thing on your own. You know, that it's not about, and I worry now, I mean, certainly globally, there seems to be a shift towards, you know, the kind of leaders that are about power and ego, and, you know, that not about, there's not about, nothing to do with integrity. You can say whatever you like, even if it's untrue, it doesn't matter. You can just invade another country because you want to, you know, and people will not stand up against you. And there's a worrying trend back to that old style of leadership. And what Dusting Off Thunderbolts, Stephen Pressfield's lovely piece that I print in the cover, says that those leaders are doomed because they think it's about them and that they have to be the great one. And people will only follow the great one. All that stuff, that awful stuff we used to get fed when I was training on charisma, you know, which has almost become a dirty word now, hasn't it? But for the right reasons, I think. But the gods are waiting with their thunderbolts to strike down the people who think it's all about them. You know, that it's inevitable. And yet, the gods need the human spirit to do their work. So it's not about saying, oh, you know, I'm humble and I'm small and they're mighty. And it's not about that. You have all the answers within inside you. You just need the muse to unlock it. And you'll be amazed once the lock starts to be turned. Things come tumbling out. You know, I didn't write this chapter. I did write a chapter, but I didn't put it in the book. And, you know, John West Burnham's lovely work on shallow, deep, profound learning. And I mean, I love what he says about it. And I talk about, I introduced again in this chapter that's not in the book, the notion of the pianist and how the shallow learning, and shallow is not meant to be judgmental. Shallow just means it's learning, but it's not in any great depth. So that when you start playing the piano, then you become a deep learner when you suddenly understand the rhythms and then you get into profound learning when it's almost intuitive. But what I introduced was my fourth level, and I called it unfathomable learning. You know, a fathom is a measurement of depth in water, and I discovered, you know, that the sailors used to work. A fathom was actually measured from the tip of this finger, this longest finger, to the tip of that. So when they pulled a rope, that was 1 fathom, and they'd pull it. And sometimes the water was so deep it was unfathomable because the rope wasn't long enough. And the world of the muses and duende and the spirit and what lies in us is unfathomable. The depths to you, I just will never discover. And isn't that a wonderful concept? And that's in everyone. Do you remember little Bernie in the book, who was the least able, the least academic kid I ever taught, had this wonderful old tatty shed full of tropical fish. It was a wonderland inside that shed. And he transcended everything when he was in that shed. And I stood in the shed and cried my eyes out, because this lad's life, little fella's life in school, was hell, because he was only being judged by their standard and their sets of rules. And yet in his shed, and we didn't know about it. And nothing in our curriculum ever asked Bernie, you know, what are you passionate about, Bernie? And if he'd have had the courage, he'd have said tropical fish, and then he would have blown them away. And what would happen now in, say, the Google schools in America is they would have built a whole curriculum for Bernie around fish. He'd have done all his maths, he'd have done everything else around tropical fish, and he would have become a professor. I have no doubt. And yet he was bottom of the class in set 13 in a secondary modern school. My goodness me, our system said we had this little fella who the muse touched every time he got home and went into that shed, and we didn't know about it. What are we doing?
Well, John, I think that the way that you speak about children, about people with such care and such compassion, and there's a real dignity that you afford to everybody that you work with, and I think it came over in spades in the magic weaving business, which is still my favorite education book of all time. But when I read this one, this was just equally beautiful. And I think for anybody who thinks that leadership is not for them, that they are on the fence about it, that anybody who's become jaded or disillusioned or wants to reconnect with the reason they get up every morning in leadership, whether that's in school, whether that's in a different sector, this is such a rich, life-affirming, revitalizing, warm book, but absolutely full of wisdom. And I can't thank you enough for writing it, because you say you're a collector of stories, but you're incredibly generous to then share those stories with everybody else so they can benefit from the learning that can happen as a result of it. So I would thoroughly recommend Dusting Off Thunderbolts for leadership, for aspirant leaders, or for anybody who just wants to reconnect with thinking about the effect that they can have in their life, whether they are at home with family, whether they're out at work, whether pursuing hobbies, whoever you come into contact with. This book will change your thinking and change your life. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time to read it, and also to talk to me tonight. This is like the best thing ever for me. The best I'll ever. Thank you as well, John. Where can we get this book? Just remind anybody who's listening.
Well, I mean, it's on Amazon, and that's the usual place. But also, I think what I'm going to do is I may even start. I'm thinking maybe of running 1 or 2 conferences around the book, and then maybe doing a workbook with it, so that they can we can dig in together. So that's something, you know, that's a distant drumbeat. But also when I do conferences as well, you know, people sometimes ask if I will bundle it in, so I can go back to John Catt, and instead of it being, what's it at? It's about £16.
I haven't got my glasses on.
It's about 16.
It's not got a price on the back.
It's got a price somewhere. I think it's about 16. But anyway, so we'd reduce the price then. So, you know, when people book conferences, and also, obviously, I will take some with me, and I do like to sign them. I do like to sign books. I don't know why. I think it's because whenever I, you know, would buy Michael Fullen's books or Andy Hargreaves or Tim Brighouse, yeah. But honestly, that's the emotional bit. Doesn't it mean a lot more when it's been signed and there's a message?
And I've shown people that, and they've gone, "Oh, he signed it." I know. Brought it to life.
Emma, that's been a joy.
Oh, it's been an absolute joy, and thank you so much. And anybody who's listening to John, you will have heard him speak tonight so beautifully and so eloquently. If you do get the chance to go and see Sir John speak formally at a conference, I can guarantee you that it will be the event of your career, and everybody I've spoken to who's ever seen you speak, Sir John, said exactly the same thing. It's a treat, and it's a must-have experience. So read the book, see Sir John speak, and enjoy Dusting Off Thunderbolts. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Sir John. Have a lovely evening.
Always a pleasure, and you have a lovely holiday, Emma. You've earned it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.